Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight on Hercules and the Space Gods, we take a voyage into mythical beasts and fabulous monsters. I got that backwards. Mythical monsters and fabulous beasts. And we have our distinguished panel with us, Brian Walker of Brian's Drive-In Theater. And we have Setna of Khemet to share his Egyptian wisdom. We have Hal Rainbow to herald in Tales of Dragons. We have Carole Gonzales to give us more Tales of Dragons. We're going to understand dragons very well tonight. And last but not least, we have Olav Phillips, publisher, investigator, author, you name it, Olav's done it. And I'm really looking forward to his take on the world Serpent, who some of you know as Jormungandr. So we will start with popular culture and Brian Walker. Greetings, Brian.
How are you this evening, Hercules?
I am doing amazingly well, and I'm looking forward to your wisdom on movies that I may not have heard of.
Well, I wanted to build on a couple of discussions that we've had, a couple of previous shows, where we had discussed the carnival setting in some horror and science fiction movies. Well, I found a movie today that bridges the gap between tonight's topic and the one I've been beating like a dead horse for the last couple of episodes. And that is a movie called She Freak, which is actually something I wanted to talk with you about last week, and we never got around to it. She Freak is a really interesting film. It came out in May of 1967, and it was produced and oddly enough written by producer David F. Friedman, who got his start with notorious producer Kroger Babb, who produced movies like Mom and Dad, kind of sexual hygiene films that were oddly popular in the mid to late 1940s. They were oftentimes shown in kind of disreputable theaters and such. So that's how David F. Friedman got his start, by kind of these back alley theaters. He improved his lot somewhat in life. He moved on to a partnership with famed director and producer Herschel Gordon Lewis, who was famous for his sort of Blood trilogy. It's Blood Feast from 1963, 2000 Maniacs, which is probably one of my top 10 favorite films from 1964. And then the final one, Color Me Blood Red, which is an interesting film about a painter who can't find just the right shade of red for his canvas until he accidentally cuts his girlfriend. And then he goes on a killing spree from there. It's a fun movie. But Friedman and Herschel Gordon Lewis went their separate ways after Color Me Blood Red debuted in 1965. David F. Friedman wanted to do what were increasingly being called roughies. These were sexploitation films in the 1960s. It's kind of a short-lived genre because the Hays Code sort of fell apart in the late 1960s, and it allowed movie makers, it allowed producers and directors to show more skin, more nudity. Until then, filmmakers were really limited as to what they could show, and under certain conditions as well. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this film for several reasons. One of them is the star, Claire Brennan. She is the She Freak. Her name, the character that she portrays in She Freak is Jade Cochran, and she comes from a really poor background. She has this Southern accent, only to find out if you look at her filmography that she's from Orange County, California. The accent's not too bad though. It fooled me for a minute or two. Anyway, she's a very striking woman, pretty good actress too. To tell you the truth, I think honestly, this is David F. Friedman's best movie, and I know that that's damning the movie with faint praise, but it's actually really engaging. I watched it again just this afternoon, and I got to say, for 86 minutes or so, I had a great time. I love the film, and it is competently shot, and it's got a couple of features that I wanted to talk about. For one thing, Felix Sia, who portrayed Cousin It in the original ABC series, The Addams Family, it has a role in this film as the Carnival owner's sort of right-hand man, I suppose. And the Carnival owner is portrayed by character actor Bill McKinney, who was in so many movies in the 70s and 80s. He played a really good, crooked cop thug. You'll remember him from Deliverance, the 1972 film, starring Burt Reynolds, because he's the horny hillbilly who is going to rape Ned Beatty. That's Bill McKinney. Okay, in this he's actually a protagonist. Well, he's a good guy, not a protagonist really. He's a good guy in it, and it's odd to see him in this role. And it's not that he's bad at it or anything. And I think it's just my expectation, but I kind of want him to be mean, or because he was in so many of his film appearances. He was always a crooked, or he's great at portraying the bad guy. I guess is probably what I'm saying. And to see him in this kind of milquetoast role was a little odd for me, but fascinating.
An actor, he can act.
Oh yeah, very, very well. He was very good. Excellent. And nobody in this film turns in a bad performance, to tell you the truth. Every performance in it's pretty good. And I think the performances, plus the fact that David F. Friedman wrote this out of his own experience in working in carnivals when he was a kid. He knew what he was writing about. And if you do know your subject matter, and he knew the setting very well, and the setting is almost a character in this film in and of itself. If you're an amusement park carnival guy like I am, I love amusement parks. The film's really fascinating to watch because a lot of it was shot at the Ventura County Fair in Ventura, California, and the rest of it was shot at the California State Fair in Sacramento. So the carnival grounds and the carnies and everything are very cleaned up. It's not a disgusting, dirty carnival or anything like that. It's actually very clean. A lot of it has to do with Jade's odd hatred for carnival freaks, but she's working in a carnival, which is kind of odd at the same time. And that plot point sort of comes and goes. It's not a perfect film, by any means. There's such a build to the denouement that it's almost an afterthought. So it's not, like I said, not a perfect film, but a lot of fun to watch. To see old carnival scenes from the mid 1960s, and this was shot in the summer of '66. It's Whoa, and another footnote about this film, I almost forgot. Claire Brennan, the star, and Felix Sia, the gentleman who portrayed Cousin It in the Addams Family. And he was on some of the Sid and Marty Krofft Saturday morning series in the 70s because he was, a little person he could fit into, the smaller costumes. He and Claire Brennan had a relationship. They met on the set of this film. Fell in love, had a child, and they were together pretty much until she became ill with cancer and died at that really young age too. She was just in her early 40s. Kind of sad.
Yeah, it is sad.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, in my review of the film on such a sad note, because I really recommend seeing it. It's exploitation film. An exploitation film, certainly, but it's not sexploitation. There's nothing in it. There's a stripper in it, but you don't really see anything. So it's they talk about stripping, but if they don't do it, it's still pretty clean, right? Yeah, it wasn't like David F. Friedman's other films, which were kind of rough. One of his better known titles was The Defilers, which he shot before he shot this movie. And it's kind of a sick and twisted. I mean, the plot line's kind of sick. But this film, I think he redeems himself somewhat. He puts in a pretty good horror film. You have to wait a long time for the payoff, which is a shame. But I'll forgive it that because I had so much fun watching it along the way that I was okay with them wrapping it up in essentially 45 seconds. I guess they ran out of color film stock or something and just decided to turn off the camera. But they did come up with a satisfying for it, and I can't recommend the film enough. A lot of fun. At the end, Claire Brennan, the protagonist, Jade Cochran, has become one of the carnival sideshow freaks. So she's become what she feared most. And her fate was created by the fact that she wanted something better for herself than her mother had had. And she gives a speech in the diner that she's working in originally about how her mother was 43 years old, had 9 children, looked like she was 100 years old, and she didn't want that life for herself. So she dared to step out of that traditional, mother role, only to be turned into a carnival sideshow freak. So obviously David F. Friedman had some issues with women, but obviously, but with this film alone, you could tell. But it's a really fun film to watch. I loved it. And if you're an amusement park aficionado like I am, or if you love carnivals, and it's summer, so it's sort of that season for that sort of thing, you'll love this film. It's lovingly shot. It really is. It's a step above anything you would expect this producer to do.
And it's in the public domain now and available?
No, unfortunately, it is not. I had to resort to my old something weird copy, which I probably had for 20, gosh, I don't know how long I've had that thing. But yeah, I went physical media in doing my research today. So.
Very good. And are clips available on YouTube?
Oh yes, you can find anything on YouTube. Yeah, you can certainly watch the trailer. The trailer is public.
Ah, okay.
And to tell you the truth, if you don't have 86 minutes to devote to watching this film, watching the trailer, I think will probably intrigue you enough. Maybe even to watch the whole movie. I love it. I think it's fascinating.
And you're an excellent judge of movies, so I will quest for it.
Yeah. Well, some people question my tastes, but I think they're pretty good.
I think it's pretty good too.
Thank you, Hercules.
And now we continue with the Children of Serpent with Michael K. Waterman, also known as Setna Comwest of Khemet.
Greetings, everybody. How are you tonight? And for those that it fits, happy Pride. I would have been in the parade in New York, but I'm down here in gorgeous, beautiful Savannah, Georgia, and likely to remain so. I'm very happy here. I want to start with, I guess, our serpent villain in Egypt, and his name is Apep. He is a daily battler with Ra. He is the negative evil serpent that swallows the sun and also causes night to happen. Very similar to Fafnir, the dragon in Viking culture, a very negative battle. Odin does battle with Fafnir, and so does Thor. And Ra and Horus do battle with Apep, who is really nasty. Ra himself becomes a cobra whose name is Wadjet. It's an interesting, Ra has many forms. Ra is a falcon-headed god. He is he is a ram, and he is Wadjet, who is a cobra. So we have cobra there. We have a female protective goddess. Her name is Renanet. My brother used to call her Renanet. It's a very long name. She was more prominent in the 20th dynasty, or I should say 20th dynasty. She rules what is called the Mendenet Habu, which is a natural pyramid which overlooks the Valley of the Kings. It's a very interesting place. They got tired of building pyramids, I guess, or ran out of money doing it because it's very expensive. And so they found this, I guess it's like a cliff that looks like a pyramid. I've been there. It's very interesting. And if you didn't know any better, you'd swear they chiseled it. It's not perfect. It's not an exact pyramid, but close enough. My favorite goddess in Egypt, besides Isis, is Metzger. She sounds like she's a Jewish, language teacher, Mrs. Metzger. Metzger is the goddess of silence. She, I guess if a cobra bites you, you're going to be silent after a while. But she is very powerful, and she protects children. And she also stops wars. We kind of need her right now. There was Nabeka also. The other cobra that I'm wearing on my head and also on my necklace, and I'm going to show you a little small version of my necklace. This is the eye of Horus. Little tiny version. And I keep disappearing. It's kind of magical. this is Urea. She is the cobra who is the protective goddess of all of Egypt, but she is originally from where, and she's wearing the red crown. So she's from Lower Egypt. The Nile flows up, which is weird. It's the only river in the world that flows north, but it's because of Victoria Falls. And so she and her friend over here, who's called Nekbet, are protective of Upper and Lower Egypt. I keep disappearing. I guess it's the way the background goes. But so you have this amazing cobra who is all pharaohs wear on their heads. I'm a high priest, not a pharaoh, but I'm wearing it on my head today too. And so I thought it's powerful and a positive protective thing. Cobras in Egypt are not looked on as negative. They are protective. They are there to guard different areas and things. I don't know. In my mind, it's a very scary thing. I've seen them in, museums, and I've seen them in zoos. And I wouldn't feel very protected with a real cobra in front of me. I'd be petrified myself. But the Egyptians knew, they had snake charmers back even in those days. And so they used the cobra to kind of guard things, kind of a watch snake. And they did it with many other animals. They had them with crocodiles, with the god Subek, and they had them with lions, with the various lion gods and goddesses. So the Egyptians knew how to domesticate animals in a way that most cultures didn't. I know India also was very famous for its snake charmers, using the little flute and having the snake appear out of nowhere. And, snakes are deaf. So it's not that the snake is hearing the flute. What's happening is that the snake charmer is doing this thing, and the snake is following the movement of the charmer and becomes mesmerized by the flute. No snakes can hear. They feel vibration, but they don't hear. But my point here is that these gods and goddesses of Egypt are thousands and thousands of years old. The one that's called Wedjet, which is Ra, is said to have come from a planet beneath. I think it might be somewhere near Saturn, that would come around slowly around the sun and wrap around the sun, like a snake crown will wrap around the pharaoh's head. So that's kind of a cool thing. And Ra then, they say, also comes from this galaxy outside of us, and that has came later into the area near Saturn or Jupiter. So that's kind of cool. So, the last thing I want to mention is the caduceus, which is the symbol of health that the Greeks use. It's a staff and it's got wrapped snakes. The Greco-Egyptian god Asclepius, who is Hermes Trismegistus, his son, is seen always carrying the caduceus. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Hercules?
Yeah, it's pronounced in different ways. In versions, he's Apollo's son rather than Hermes' son.
Well, if you read the Emerald Tablet, Asclepius is supposed to have written this thing based on what he knew from Hermes Trismegistus, who was supposed to be his earthly father, at least in the Emerald Tablet in any case. But so the point is that you have two snakes, and I'm going to kind of trump you here. I hate to use that word. Hercules is known from the beginning of his birth to have grabbed two snakes and kind of broke them apart in his cradle. So I think of the two snakes as the snakes that Hercules destroyed at birth. So I thought that would be a good way to segue into something else.
Okay. Again, there are different interpretations of all these symbols. If you look at it from a shamanic perspective, and there's a lot in the Hercules mythos that I guess is saturated with or reeks of shamanism. The two serpents are portrayed as still alive, and they're near his ears. So they're opening him up to the same type of wisdom that Hermes received, because Hermes spoke with the dragon. In Greek, drakos means a big snake. So it could be the dragons we're familiar with through Western mythology. It could be a big snake, or it could be a fabulous creature or mythical monster like a many-headed serpent. Hercules had several of those in his mythology as well.
As long as it's not a basilisk. That's the one snake I don't ever want to meet.
I believe your chances of encountering one now are slim, so I think you're safe.
Oh, let's hope so.
Thank you, Setna. That was excellent. And now we move on with our topic to Hal Rainbow. Hal, I'm honored to have you here today. Your participation has been part of the evolution of the show, but we don't have the privilege and the honor of having you on very often. So welcome tonight.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here, and anytime I am more than honored and glad to attend. So going from snakes to cryptozoology, and we were talking about languages before the show started, and all you have to do is take some dragon's blood and drink it, and you get to understand every language. One of the perks of it. But at any rate, dragons are divided into two cultures, Eastern and Western. The Eastern dragons are considered gods, watchers, protectors, strength, like the dragon throne, kings and emperors, and they come from the sun. Western dragons are sly, evil, cruel, mischievous, and generally totally evil, and they're supposed to come from the center of the earth. So they think dragons originated because of people's fear of snakes, actually. And so the legends grew from there. But as I said, dragons are considered tricksters. And they go through, and the word dragon itself, if you trace it back and go through its many translations, actually means the watcher. Because dragons would originally, in Western culture, they would guard things. They would guard the golden apples of youth, the golden fleece, the tree of life. And they would protect these things till some type of hero came along and basically killed them. So, as and then dragons also, as time went on, particularly when the Christian era hit, they became more and more evil, symbols of the devil. The devil was also known in some cases as the great dragon. So again, they just sort of transformed. In the earlier legends, dragons were mostly known for eating sheep, burning fields, ruining herds of cattle, and then as the Christian era grew, they suddenly started switching over to virgins, who, for some reason, always wore white. Again, for the purity of it. And then the main purpose of the dragon in Western literature was actually to be combative and give the hero something to kill, because dragons very rarely had names in Western literature. And as I said, heroes would fight them. And very often, the hero was actually the villain because he was trying to steal something. But perhaps the most famous dragon in English literature is the dragon from St. George and the Dragon. There's no explanation of where he comes from. He's incredibly cruel. He destroys things with fire, and St. George, being the good Christian knight, kills him. And everyone lives happily ever after, except the dragon. There is, if you go to the German treasury from Bavaria, there is this incredible statue of St. George and the Dragon. It's 1.5 feet tall and has 1,700 jewels in it.
Wow.
The dragon skin is totally made up of emeralds. But that's just a side note. And in literature, there are some very famous dragons. There's Fafnir from the Norse legends, who was mentioned. There's Smog from Tolkien, the Great Thief. And who else do we have here? I'm sorry for doing it this way. There was, who you mentioned. Am I pronouncing this right? Apep of Egypt?
Apep, yes.
Apep. And then there's also Satan, the Great Red Dragon from the Bible. And oddly enough, perhaps one of the most famous dragons in modern times is the dragon that Maleficent turns into in the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty. Ask almost any kid about it, and they will tell you about that dragon. Now, if you jump up to modern times, dragons have become much friendlier and sweeter in pets, such as in How to Tame Your Dragon, the children's book series. There is, I'm sorry, you.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I can't hear him either.
Now I can't hear him. I was able to hear him before.
I was going to mention Pete's dragon and Puff the magic dragon.
Oh, Magic Dragon, yes. Well, we certainly have a lot of serpentine images and their meanings floating around in our popular culture, whether it's through entertainments or through surviving mythology that we've kept alive or through occultism. So this has been very illuminating. We'll get back to how, but picking up the topic is Carole.
Comment.
I was going to add a few things to what Hal was talking about. I was looking at, of course, dragons are a creature of fantasy, lots of stories. Hal touched upon many of them. The earlier stories, the dragons didn't have wings, and
Right.
they didn't necessarily breathe fire. And as they evolved, they changed. And I'm thinking of the Game of Thrones dragons, and of course, the Tolkien dragons. Tolkien had 4 dragons. Hal mentioned Smaug. Well, of course, we know Smaug from The Hobbit, but he had a lot of he had 4 other dragons who were pretty awful, worse than Smaug. And one of them was Glaurung. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the dragons of the Silmarillion and the story of Turin Turambar. That was one evil dragon. He had no wings. He spoke poison. He could control humans with his speech. He could control their thoughts and enslave them, which he did. Horrible dragon. He created a terrible, when I read the story, I thought, oh, how horrible. He had a brother and a sister, cleansed their minds, had them marry each other, and when they discovered that they were actually siblings, he taunted Turin as he died. And he just slithered and taunted him. Turin couldn't even die properly. He did kill him, but he couldn't die properly. Of course, the sister and Turin both committed suicide because they couldn't live knowing they had sinned or they had been lovers. So that was Glaurung, the dark. Then we have Ancalagon, the dark. He's also the dark, the black, and he was Morgoth's dragon. He did have wings. He's the father of all dragons. And then you have Smaug. He's a descendant, and Skatha. So these are other dragons that Tolkien devised. And he was inspired by mythology. He was inspired by Fafnir, who was mentioned before. He was inspired by all these things. Another person who was inspired by mythology and by Tolkien is George Martin. I had the good fortune of meeting him. So I chatted a bit with him. He was inspired by Tolkien very much. You can see it in his writings and his work, and also history as well. And his dragons are Balerion, Vagar, and Visenya, Rhaenys, and the Conqueror. They were all siblings, and they all rode their dragons. So Visenya rode Vagar, and Meraxes was Rhaenys and Balerion. And if you're watching House of the Dragon, there are people riding them except for Balerion because he was so old. He remembered he had seen Valeria, and he was dead by the time of the activities of House of the Dragon. And those dragons are pretty awful. So other dragons that always interested me, well, the idea of dragons was the Emperor of China was known as the dragon. But of course, in the East, they're a symbol of goodwill and blessings and wonderful things, very different from the Western dragons. You can see the influence of Christianity from the book of Revelation, where the dragon is a symbol of chaos and darkness, as well as the symbol of Satan. But Hal is back if he wants to continue his talk.
Well, we're going to return to Hal. So Hal is bookending this presentation. So why don't you finish what you're saying, then we'll return to Hal.
Yes, well, pretty much. I don't want to repeat what Hal said. I could go back to repeat that. But dragons were wonderful stories from Greek mythology. The dragons that guarded the 3 golden apples of the Garden of Hesperides. The story is that Draco, the constellation, is a symbol of that dragon. Landon was his name, and Hera. Excuse me. You probably pronounced it right.
Yeah, Ladon is his name.
Ladon, yes, yes. So she rewarded him for being a loyal servant by placing him in the constellations. And later, the Ptolemy mentioned this as one of the 88 constellations that he wrote about in his treatise back in the ancient days. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I don't want to repeat what Hal said, but he will continue with his talk later.
Thank you, Carole. That was very illuminating. And my wife and I just finished watching House of the Dragon yesterday, the first season, and we're looking forward to the second season.
First season? Oh, you've got more to come. You should wait till you get to the second season.
It's continued. We thought it wasn't out yet, the House of the Dragon.
It's 2 episodes are out already. Did you finish the first season completely?
Yes, we finished first season completely.
Yeah, well, there's 2 episodes out. There's one tonight. Tonight is the 3rd episode. And watch for the first episode. The ending of the first episode has a surprise for you. So
Okay.
I don't want to go further than that.
We'll watch that, and now you'll know what I'm doing tonight after the show. Hal, we return to you.
I'm very sorry. My phone overheated and turned off.
That's okay. We live in the age of and these things happen alarmingly frequently.
The only thing I wanted to add was a couple of modern dragons, because as I don't want to repeat what Carole said also, but sort of going back and forth. As I said, there was Toothless, the dragon from the children's series, How to Train Your Dragon. And I don't know if you mentioned him, Carole, but Farmer Giles of Ham.
Oh, yes, yes, there's a dragon there too.
Who's one of my favorite dragons, because when Farmer Giles goes to fight him, his reaction is, no, you're doing it wrong. You haven't introduced your magic sword. We haven't discussed protocol. We haven't been polite. He's just a wonderful, wonderful, fussy dragon. And
his name, Crystal Fox. Well, how do you pronounce his name? I can't pronounce it.
Crystal Fox.
Crystal Fox, but he had a second name. Okay.
And then the last dragon I wanted to mention, there is a new show out that teaches recycling to children. And one of the characters is Smelton, who is a very much wisecracking dragon based on roughly Bugs Bunny in terms of attitude. So he's the latest one to come out. I don't know if you saw from the House of Dragon, if anyone is around New York, to celebrate at the Empire State Building, built one of the dragons and wrapped it around the Empire State Building.
Vega was wrapped around.
I would suggest, if you get the chance, Google it. He was a wonderful thing.
It's on my Facebook page.
That's the second thing I'll be doing tonight.
And that's basically, building off what Carole has is what I wanted to put about dragons. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I look forward to returning. Carole started coming back more regularly, so I'm glad that you've started coming back as well.
Okay.
And now we move on to Olav. who will regale us with tales of the world serpent.
So first of all, I have a bit of a cold, everybody, so I apologize. There might be some coughing. But it was, when Hercules came to me to talk about this, I saw an obvious serpent that not a lot is, it depends. If you watch Vikings, you hear about the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, the world serpent. But if you don't really follow Viking stuff, you're not going to hear about it. Basically, the premise is that Loki and a giant Angerboda had 3 children. And the first child, I believe the oldest child, was Hel, the goddess of the underworld. The second child was the Jormungandr, the world serpent, what became the world serpent. And the third was Fenrir the wolf. And the children were considered to be dangerous. In some places it says they were ugly, but that's kind of like the Viking version of you're dangerous, so we're going to do something about you. So Hel was cast down into the netherworld to become the goddess of the dead. The world serpent was actually thrown into the ocean when it was still very small and grew unabated because the Earth's oceans gave it no limit. So it just kept growing and eating and growing and eating until it eventually encircled the world. And then the third, Fenrir, he was sent to an island and he was chained and bound within a mountain, I believe. So in the case of the world serpent, so the typical view of the world serpent is that it's the serpent that encompasses Midgard, the world. And you don't really interact with it much. It's only mentioned a few times in the epics. One where Thor is given a test to see how strong he is. Some of the other giants, and gods, they gave him a test. And so they told him to pick up a magic cat. And so he went in. This is the classic view of the world serpent. He picks up the cat and he's like, look, I'm picking up the cat. And it turns out that the cat was a magic cat. It was actually the world serpent compressed into a cat, but he lifted it. So I was like, oh my goodness, you're so powerful and strong. The second is that he's fishing and he happens to snare the world serpent and reel it in. And he's about to slay it, but one of the other gods there gets afraid, and so it cuts the line. And Thor is very pissed off because he knows that in the future that the world serpent becomes something very powerful and dangerous. And this is going to get to what I think an interesting modern interpretation of the world serpent is. But one of the essential parts about the world serpent is that it's an Ouroboros. So the tail of the serpent is held within the serpent's mouth, right? Very classic Ouroboros thing. You see the tail and it's got its mouth holding the tail. The reason that that's very important in this context is because for the world serpent, when the serpent of Midgard, it has many names, it's the same thing. When the serpent of Midgard, the world serpent, releases its tail, I get blurred, and its tail comes above the ocean. That is one of the symbols, one of the primary symbols of the beginning of Ragnarok, which is considered to be the end of the world. Ragnarok's important because this is a climactic final battle where, don't worry about Thor Ragnarok, we'll worry about Ragnarok, where in Viking culture, when you die a just death or a death in battle, you go to Valhalla. Well, what Valhalla actually is a longhouse where all the Viking warriors and people who died purely, and this is men and women, men and women fought in Viking Age. They all go in there and they drink and party and have sex with each other and just have a grand merry old time for centuries and eons and thousands of years until one day the serpent's tail rises and Midgard is under threat through Ragnarok, that all the bad people are going to Midgard to destroy it. At that point, the doors of Valhalla open and all the warriors go out. Shield maidens, warriors, soldiers, everybody they can fight pours out to defend their home, which is Midgard. They work with the Valkyries, they work with the gods, and everybody just tries to fight it out. Well, that symbolically is caused by the world serpent releasing its tail and the tail coming above the ocean. So what's a modern interpretation of this? And I came across this in some searches, and I think it's actually a very interesting interpretation. There's a thing called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It's basically this is part of plate tectonics. It's a ridge that runs all the way around the world. Well, it actually kind of goes like that, right? Because we all know how the world is kind of, the Earth is not a circle, it's kind of a bulge, and it kind of goes like this. But if you actually look at the way it looks, it indeed looks like a serpent. And what it is that this is a growth boundary within the Earth. It is a volcanic, it's a volcanic mountain range. Huge, unimaginably colossal volcanoes that exist in this mountain range. And so it has that going for it. It looks like a serpent. It really gives you everything that the world serpent is supposed to be, oddly, is there within the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And one of the other things that's very interesting is that there's a thing called a conveyor belt that exists in the Atlantic, where water coming out of that's being shed from the poles, actually fresh water comes into the Atlantic, and it desalinates the Atlantic around the upper boundaries of the Arctic. That water is pushed down, essentially pushed down the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, where it is salinated and pushed back up, and it creates a conveyor belt. These ocean currents actually drive a lot of weather in the Atlantic and the South Atlantic, not so much in the Pacific, but the range goes all the way around. In the event that this process fails, and for our movie guide, this would be The Day After Tomorrow, if you recognize where it's coming from. This is a thing. I know it was a book written by Whitley Strieber and the late Art Bell, but it is actually a thing I've talked to many climatologists about this. This really is a problem. Will it cause weird ice storms? Maybe, maybe not. They really can't quantify what it would actually do because it's so bad. One of the things that they believe is that if this conveyor belt, which basically runs along the Atlantic portion of, you could call it an underwater ring of fire. Well, once it goes through that, if that breaks down and it changes the dynamics of the salinity of the water, it could trigger massive volcanic activity along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. If it starts causing massive volcanic activity along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, one of the results would be is that not only would material being ejected up, and these are huge volcanoes, like makes Mount Shasta look small. I mean, these are enormous volcanoes. Well, in the case of Crater Lake, when Crater Lake exploded, Mount Minnesota, the top 4,000 feet of material was vaporized in the explosion. So you can imagine what a series of explosions along the entire fault line of the Earth would be like. Well, this material is going to come up through the ocean and appear, and it's going to open a huge rift in the bottom of the ocean with lava pouring out of it. And that amount of material being ejected and coming up, not only would it cause problems in the ocean, but it could potentially cause problems in the sky. So if you want to think about it in terms of a Ragnarok, colossal, epic, life-ending event, this is what we're talking about. This is apocalyptic. And it has the shape of the serpent. The dynamics of what would happen in the event that it was triggered is very much like the release of the Ouroboros, of the world serpent. It's appearing above the water. And the day it appears above the water, everybody on Midgard, the Earth, is going to go and try to stop it and fix it. Along the ridge in the ocean, it's going to split open and be fire, just fire and lava pouring out. This very well could be an analogous to hell, the goddess hell, not hell, but the goddess hell ascending through from the netherworld into Midgard. And you have a whole lot of other activities that would take place that very much are emblematic of a Ragnarok, aside from the Valhalla opening and people on horses with wings and fighting and frost giants and bad other things. The actual action of the destruction is very Ragnarok-ish. So I thought that was a very interesting kind of argument for Ragnarok and the world serpent. The actual world serpent being the mid-Atlantic ridge, which goes all the way around the earth and is actually oddly very serpentine. It's very serpentine. So I thought that was kind of an interesting notion of a modern implementation of Jormungandr, the world serpent. Or
I haven't heard that one before, so thank you for teaching me something new. I wasn't aware of any of that.
Oh yeah, it's dangerous. It's not good. It's like Yellowstone bad. I did have one comment, by the way,
Sure.
for Harry. When you were talking about and for Seacat, you guys were talking about Pete's Dragon and Puff the Magic Dragon and all that. And for our video guy, there is actually, I will call it a lost documentary done. I have a copy of it on 16 millimeter. It is a lost documentary done by Walt Disney Enterprises, Walt Disney Animation, where Pete's Dragon, I think it's Pete's Dragon, is the host of a documentary about the Loch Ness Monster.
Really? Wow.
That's good for the media. I got some Pete's Dragon over there, and you were asking about that stuff. So it does exist. There is actually a Walt Disney Animation documentary. I think it's 30 some odd minutes, and it is hosted by Pete's Dragon on the Loch Ness Monster.
That I will have to track down now. And also throwing things around, there is a version of Peter Pan that was done in England that it's not impossible to find, but it's not too popular, where Neverland is an amusement park. And Captain Hook is the, he's the custodian of it. It's a deserted amusement park.
I was over at the county fair with all the carnies, and so it's like I can see Captain Hook as the lead carny as this guy, basically got me to give him $30 for free. So I'm right there with you, man. But I want a cat, a stuffed cat.
Very cool. So the living mythology of serpents and dragons lives on to our day. We remember the things that the ancients told us about these creatures, and we've looked to our reality to find ways that these legends can come to life. And many of them are still believed by very many people. And Olaf's description is truly frightening, and it's certainly cataclysmic and epic, or biblical even, or mythical.
I got that from somebody who's part of the Asatru, the people who now who actually still worship the Viking Age gods. So this is something that's moving around within the Asatru movement. They do believe this.
Fitting it in with some other legends that we look at all the time, which is the UFO legends or the celestial legends. The interpretation of the world serpent is that there is actually a network of serpentine entities that are shapeshifters. So often the Bushes are accused of being shapeshifting dragons, and the British royals are accused of being shapeshifting dragons. So Jormungandr, the world serpent, the Midgard serpent, the Ouroboros are supposed to be a symbol of these people, that their network encircles the earth and chokes humanity in slavery and through manipulation. So that's another interpretation of the Midgard serpent. And we've done several programs on these reptoids or reptilians, and we've shown how there too, even though this is called conspiracy theory by some, it has its roots not only in ancient mythology and religion, but also in television programs and pulp fiction. And so all of these stories are kept alive, and we listen to them, we get entertained by them, and we live in them to a certain degree.
Well,
go ahead.
There is a serpent cult that has been linked to the Illuminati, and the way you can tell is because they will have an Ouroboros tattooed somewhere on their body, not in a ring, right? But the actual ring of the Ouroboros, it'll be tattooed somewhere hidden on their body. It's supposed to mark them as being a member of this Illuminati shady Black Lodge kind of operation. So,
And in Conan, the Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard, the serpent men of Valusia who could shapeshift existed, and they too encircled the globe and took positions of power and disguised themselves as humans, but they weren't really humans, and they couldn't say the phrase Ta Lama Kala Jarama for some reason, because if somebody said that near them, or if they said it, their disguise would evaporate. So I haven't seen that pop up in the lore yet, but it will. I want to thank everybody tonight, and because again, you expanded our knowledge base and pointed out how prevalent it is, and I'm looking forward to this series continuing. I'm starting a new series tomorrow to look at symbols like I'm starting with angels, archangels, and specifically the Archangel Michael, because he exists in very many stories and very many religious and spiritual beliefs and so forth. So I want to specifically take a look at that phenomenon. What inspired this is that in Greek, just like a dragon is a snake, in Greek, an angel is a messenger. So if I gave you a letter from Nick, who's not here tonight, I would be an angel in that case because I delivered a message from somebody to you. And that's all it means. It doesn't mean any celestial type of being. It doesn't imply wings and so forth. But these words have come to acquire new meanings. So I want to look at that as we continue to look at the dragon. And these two symbols clash. Hal brought up St. George and the dragon. In some stories, it's Michael and Satan, with Satan being the dragon. And I believe that Carole mentioned that earlier. Hal mentioned it also. So these stories, again, they impact our lives, they impact our culture, they impact our reality. So everyone today expanded our knowledge and shined a light on this information. I don't have a cold, but I'm a little out of it today, so forgive me too for kind of meandering. We're going to start with Olav and his contact information. How can people contact you, Olav?
yeah, you can find me on Facebook as Olav Phillips. You can find me on Instagram as Captain Tiki Show. I have a show on Thursdays from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Pacific on KADLP 103.5 here in Sonora. It's also KAD-LP.org. We also have podcasts that are on Apple Music or wherever you find podcasts. We interview interesting people. So probably Facebook or Instagram are the easiest.
And please feel free to advertise all of your efforts on my pages, such as they are, and more people. And now we go down to Carole. Carole, how can people contact you?
I'm on Facebook, and anyone is welcome to ask to friend me and share all kinds of unusual stories with me, because I love posting about things like that.
Thank you very much. Hal, I believe the electronic age swallowed him up again. So we will go to Setna. Setna, how can people find you and interact with you?
I'm also on Facebook. You can get me at Michael K. Waterman. You can get me on my work address, which is Phone a Wizard, on Facebook also. You can get me on my email, mkwaterman@icloud.com. And you can get me by phone if you want to. I still have my Long Island number, 516-650-3691. Or you can reach me through you, Hercules, of course.
And I like the fact that you kept your Long Island accent as part of your repertoire of speaking. I too spent significant chunks of my life on Long Island.
I
So
grew up in Uniondale, and I'm very proud of Uniondale, Long Island. You know, I was going to show you guys one more thing.
sure.
This is the back end of one of my tarot cards. And if you can see it, it's like an orange symbol. You have a snake biting its tail,
Mhm.
which vanishes easily, I see. I have a lot of magical implements around me, and they do kind of vanish, which is kind of fun.
Yes, it is special effects you can do at home.
I'll tell you a story about that sometime. I found a vanishing altar. I saw a vanishing altar in a witch shop, a true witch's shop. So remind me All
One of
lives.
my favorite places on earth, Olaf, was, of course, Magical Child. I am an alumni, not an Illuminati, an alumni of Magical Child. And in my old neighborhood, which was Newark, things vanished a lot anyway, magical or not.
Well, it's all magical in its own special way.
That's the topic of another show. Hal is back. Hal, can you hear us?
Yeah, again, my apologies for my phone. I wasn't expecting to have to use a phone. There's a storm going in Staten Island and it's screwing things up rapidly.
We've had
So-
it here on and off in the past few hours, so I can hear it sometimes through the window. How can people contact you?
They can contact me through my email, which is the letter H, the word rain, RAIN, and the letter B at AOL.com.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Brian of Brian's Drive-In Theater.
Visit me at briansdriveintheater.com for the movie of the day, also the day's birthdays, and more than 300 pages of your favorite B-movie actor and actress profiles. You can also interact with me on social media. Right now, I'm down to Facebook because I gave up on whatever we're calling Twitter these days. But interact with me on Facebook, either by running a search for Brian's Drive-In Theater or Brian Walker.
And Brian is indeed a living encyclopedia of B and other movies. We've been conversing about this, I'd say going on like 7-8 years, and several times a month. And he still hasn't run out of information to share. So thank you, Brian, and thank you, everybody. You've certainly shed light on my world and bring much joy to it. I enjoy speaking with all of you, and I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Hercules.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this should be on YouTube by sometime tomorrow, and I will send everybody a link.
That's
Oh.
totally cool. I can't wait.
Yes.
Blessings all.
Blessings.